Hello, my name is Justin Bright. Welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And what we have going on today is just all sorts of stuff. So we have lots of missions kind of coming up, and I mentioned before that I have a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of interplanetary transfers queued up in my alarm so I could kind of watch them and try to hit all of them. But man, they all kind of come at once, it feels like. So I ended up having to, I know, and this is terrible, but I had to actually trim the list of interplanetary transfers I wanted to make this year, so I actually can't hit everything that I want. I know, it's terrible. But the idea is I'm going to try to hit a couple, but I'm trying to not accept the contracts before I actually am underway. So this is kind of a weird thing, but you'll notice in the flyby contracts that they do not specify new vessel, which means that you can do it with, like, technically you could do it with an old vessel that you have, you know, lying around, but that's kind of nonsense. What this means for me is that I can launch a spacecraft, get it underway, and only once I realize that it is actually going to make it and fly by the planet, then I can accept the contract. I'm doing this for two reasons. First, because there's a ton of these, and I don't want to. I actually do have a hard limit, so I guess I am putting the lie to the thing I just got done saying in the last episode that I don't like to, that I never really bother with having more than 7 contracts at a time. But the bigger thing is that my RL-10 is brand new. So small spoilers for my next the next rocket that I'm going to be talking through, but. You'll see that I'm using the RL-10 A-3 vacuum engine, which is the first of that Hydrolox series of upper stage boosters. I never actually got around to using the RL-10 A-1, which is the prototype version. I skipped right to the A-3-1, which is, I guess, the production model that was actually used on Atlas Centaur and the Saturn I. So I'm using it for exactly that purpose. But even at that level, like the first one has a 30% ignition failure rate, which is a huge bummer. But even the next version up has a 20% ignition failure rate, which is not great when I have 2 of them to ignite for each of these interplanetary launches. So much as I'd love to just start chucking these rockets out there, I need to be a little bit cautious with what I accept, in the hopes that, you know, I don't fail utterly and end up crashing my space program to the ground. But I think there's a couple different options that I have as far as making this work. Like, I have a little RL-10 sounding rocket that I could make that's bolted together out of spare parts. This little guy here, using 100% already existing tooled stuff, I'm able to get a not a full burn by any stretch, but that'll get an ignition and a couple minutes of burn time, and also have the surface level thrust to get off the pad, and uses parts that I had lying around already tooled. So everything's already tooled. I don't have to spend a penny more on this thing, which is what you would want for something as junky as this. But yeah, if I didn't want to do this, then like I do have launches coming up that we're going to use the RL-10 in a production fashion, but man, it's that 20% ignition failure rate has me real nervous. So anyways, all that to say, I have trimmed my list of some of the transfers that I want to do, and I'm not doing everything all at once, so that I don't crash up my space program. Okay, so we've spent a couple points in the vehicle assembly building, but there's so much more that we want to do. Like, I'm finding that even with all of the upgrades that we've done so far, I still need to move a lot faster. Like, we could be doing stuff a lot faster and getting these rockets done a lot sooner, because we're missing launch windows, and it's already more than halfway through. It's the summer of 1969 right now, guys, so I am behind the ball here. And technology especially. Like, there's so much tech. We have gotten a lot of science, which has allowed me to unlock a fairly tremendous amount of technology nodes, but it's all backlogged. Like, this is all just taking a very long time to get through. Like, there's so many things that I want to do and I want to get done quickly, but we need to keep improving our technology to be able to get to it. Like, and this is with increasing my science capacity by something like, I think one of the commenters on my video told me it was like 40% or so that I increased my development rate. and it still feels like it's going very slowly. So yeah, we have a lot that we can still do, and I think I have a plan for how to fix that. So let's, but the only way to get to it is by just cranking on through. So let us move on forward to our next launch. All right, here we have Johnny Flores on the pad with the final mission of a Mercury Tele spacecraft. Let's engage the autopilot. Ignition. We have liftoff of the Mercury Tele E-2, which is the final launch of a Mercury spacecraft out of Cape Canaveral. So yes, indeed, this is going to be the last launch, basically to satisfy an Orbital Flight 1 crew contract that I ill-advisedly accepted. I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to do with this, but I don't think that it's actually possible. With the amount of Delta V that I have in this service module, I just don't think that I can actually rendezvous with anything I have in orbit. Like, I don't have anything in like a nice tight low Earth orbit. I just don't think that we're going to be able to make that happen. Little bit of a last-minute adjustment there, wobbling up and down and making Johnny Flores freak out a little bit, probably. Although he's a cool, collected individual, he's totally fine. He's used to me flying like an absolute jerk. So I am adjusting our orbit slightly, our intended orbit, because I'm changing my mind. Like, even as I'm speaking, I'm changing my mind on what I'm going to do with this thing. So I was initially intending to launch this up into an orbit that was going to rendezvous with a satellite, but I don't think I have the Delta V on the service module to make that happen. In any of my tests, I was just not even, it was not even close. And booster cut off and pop, there we go. And off comes the launch escape tower as well. Fabulous. So we are now just burning on an LR-105, bringing us up into a 200-kilometer circular orbit. And there's enough extra fuel on here that all of my futzing around did not hurt anything. But anyways, the service module that I have put on this thing has about 473 meters per second of Delta V, which is not enough to get to anything that I have in orbit. Even my lowest satellites are have like a 3 million meter apogee, and so that makes it very hard to reach with just 473 meters per second of Delta V. If I have to, from the starting criteria of starting at about between 200 kilometers and 300 kilometers, at a starting orbit of about 200 to 300 kilometers. Yeah, so because we have to satisfy the contract first, and then we can go ahead and do this rendezvous vanity project that I have. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to be kind of doing a little bit of the Gemini 4, where I'm attempting to meet up again with our booster. But I'm going to hamstring myself a little bit, just a little bit. Give myself a little bit of a challenge to make it so that I actually have to do some orbital maneuvers. So stage 1, we are in our good 200-kilometer orbit. Fabulous. So that's all wonderful. Johnny Flores is safely up and where he needs to be. So now I am going to stage off the boosters, which fully burned, you'll notice, a pair of small separation motors. And you'll notice that has reduced its perigee by about 34 kilometers. So that means this has a barely noticeable, but actually quite significant difference in its orbital parameters compared to the Mercury capsule itself. So what I can do at this point is I'm going to further split these two up, and I'm going to raise my perigee to about 300 kilometers. Or my apogee, sorry. Raise my apogee to about 300 kilometers in what is going to be a test of the ability of the Mercury Extended Service Module to perform orbital maneuvers. And that is something that the Gemini program was kind of all about, like was learning how to make these kind of orbital maneuvers, because obviously as the bridge to Apollo, it was intended to be a practice run for the eventual docking and like the rendezvous and dock with the lunar module that had to happen in both Earth orbit and around the moon. So yeah, that is kind of what the practice was for, because at this stage of the space program, we really didn't know about rendezvous. Like, we really didn't know how to make that work. So in any case, before I go any further than that, we are just going to ignite the 4 hydrazine thrusters that I have on the back of this Mercury extended module. We are executing our burn and bringing our apogee up to 300 kilometers. A little bit more, and cut the thrusters. There we go. So now we have an orbit that is 300 kilometers by 200 kilometers, and the booster stage that got us here is in a very different orbit. That is 200 kilometers by 144. Or 166 kilometers. Okay, so that means that over the 9 hours that we are going to be orbiting, these two vessels are going to drift apart very dramatically. So they are going to be very far apart by the time that I complete these orbits. Let's see, our orbital period is 1.5 hours now, so we are going to orbit 6 times. A little bit more than 6 times, and then we are going to try to rendezvous. And over the course of those 6 orbits, we will have drifted fairly significantly in either direction. So yeah, that's kind of what I think I'm going to do. That is how I'm going to like reclaim my pride of doing the first orbital rendezvous. And this is kind of a more advanced version of what they tried to do on Gemini 4. All right, so Johnny Flores is all buckled in. He has lots of work to do still. There's no more actual science to gather at this stage from the Mercury capsule, so there's none of that to do, but I'm sure he has plenty of actual scientific work that is to be done while he is on orbit. So he's not just loafing, he's got plenty to do. So we'll see you in 9 hours after that. All right, so with the contract completed, now it's time to figure out how we're going to rendezvous with the darn probe. It is a little bit ahead of us and below us in our orbit, so we have 2 options. Normally, you could go underneath the rendezvous target in your orbit, and that would help you to get faster than it. That's the only way to go faster than something in orbit, is to be below it in the orbit. But there's not a whole lot of room below it in that orbit, so we're not really going to be able to chase it super duper well unless I get like 145 by 145 orbit, which, you know, honestly, that's probably not even that bad. I wonder. All right, so we are burning ourselves down to a 145 degree perigee. I don't really care too much about what our apogee ends at until we get that settled, and then I will zip around to my perigee, and then I will circularize. So let's go ahead and do that. And the idea here is we are just going to slowly chase after this probe as low as possible to try to very, very kind of gently reach it in the orbit, because I don't want to spend a lot of delta V, because I just don't think I have enough to do anything really fancy. But what we do have is about a day and a quarter's worth of life support supplies, and the ability to maneuver fairly well inside of this orbit. So we can get ourselves. Oops, that is not what I thought it would do. Oh, that is the perigee of the target. Just going radial to trade some of my apogee for my perigee. Where the heck is my perigee? There it is. So that makes my apogee over here. Okay. All right. I got confused by the green and the blue markers, but that's fine. So we're coming around, and we are in a lower orbit. We have a lower perigee now than the probe, and once we have a lower apogee as well, then it's going to be we will be fully and officially chasing this thing and actually moving a little bit faster than it in our orbit. So we're bringing our apogee down. And we're probably going to lose all sense of encounter with this thing. Go, and yep, we're just skimming above the atmosphere, and that should be fine. So now it's a matter of figuring out when we are going to catch up with this thing. So let's say right here, I'm just going to push back up to get that encounter, and there we go. Now we can see that we have kind of a janky encounter that is not super duper helpful. But if I orbit around a bit, you can see that we get a little bit closer every single time. Boop, 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 boop. 10 hours, 11 hours, 14 hours. There we go. So that means that we can intercept in about 16 hours with just a very tiny expenditure of delta V. So now we just need to wait the 15 hours until I have finished chasing this booster. So it's been 12 hours, and you can see that we're just getting closer and closer. And as I follow, we are just slowly approaching. And now we are getting to the point where it's time to actually start making our move to intercept closely. Because we are getting closer, and we'll continue to get closer. But we need to actually match our orbit to the orbit of the vessel, at least in one additional parameter, so that we can get close to it. So now we are just about at the node, and I am going to just go ahead and make this burn to intercept fairly closely, but not like super duper closely. There we go. So we have adjusted our orbit so that we are going to be 17 kilometers away, and only at a relative speed of about 9 meters per second. All right, so in just half an hour, we are going to make our final correction burn that is going to bring us very, very close to our target. So let's go ahead and get pointed at the node. And I did a lot of this just kind of by hand, which is not the best way to do this, but this is the way that I frequently know how to do it. So what I've done is I just kind of moved it so that we are going to be matching the orbit very, very closely, and that is going to give us an intercept of about 0.1 kilometers, so just 100 meters away, with a relative speed of 10 meters per second, which means we are going to be very easily able to finish up that intercept at that point, and hopefully it'll even happen when there's some sun. All right, just a couple seconds, and we have ignited for this correction burn that should bring us to a very close approach indeed. Okay, stop. Please stop. Now we just need to adjust a little bit to make sure that we are doing what we are hoping to be doing, and yes, that seems to be just fine. Spending a tiny bit of delta V now with RCS to adjust our trajectory seems to be paying quite a bit of dividends here, and is slowing down our relative speed. And so that is that. That should bring us into a rendezvous, and that was just, the difference is just that I tried to be a little more careful about making these approaches and very slowly approaching the target instead of just kind of getting that intercept, whatever the intercept happens to be, and then just burning to get it. Because in stock KSP, the amount of delta V that you have is kind of absurd compared to what you're going to have in your standard RP-1 game. All right, so there that is. We are going to point target retrograde and start flipping around so that we can change our velocity when it is time to do so. Because we want to brake so that we get into a very similar orbit, and we want to fly with this thing until we can actually see it. Mission Control has demanded that we get visual confirmation of rendezvous with the booster, and so that is what we are going to do. So we are wheeling around, firing our RCS. You see it's getting closer and closer. We are actually very close indeed. I just want to bring our target relative velocity, not target negative. I was pointing directly at the target, which was not the right MacJeb mode. So this is target plus, target minus is pointing directly at the part which you are targeting. And then this is relative velocity plus and minus. That's, all right, no, I'm sorry. This is part plus and minus, so the individual part. This is the target in general. I'm not sure 100% what the difference is, but I'm sure someone in the comments will be along shortly to inform me. And this is the relative velocity, which we are trying very hard to adjust to right now. So what I'm doing is I'm just like turning off the node control to try to fail to finish this on my own. There we go, 0.0 relative velocity. Now we should be able to warp around to the sunny side of Earth without losing too much of our rendezvous. We're just gonna let Johnny Flores spin a bit. And sunrise on Earth as we reassess where we are and make plans to get a little bit closer. All right, so we are rotating around. We are getting ourselves as close as we can. I'm not sure why it's pointing off to one side of the target. Maybe that's just where the center of the whole vessel is. Part plus, I don't know what the heck is happening here, but nothing seems to be doing what I want it to, so I am assuming control. What I'm planning to try to do here is I'm just pointing myself in the general direction of the vessel, and we are moving a little bit towards it. At this range, you can do kind of the intuitive thing of pointing yourself at the target and thrusting, but that was something that Gemini 4 had a lot of trouble with. At any significant distance, that doing that sort of thing is just going to change your orbit relative to the target, and that is going to mean that you are not going to be meeting up with that thing. You are going to be going, like, you thrust towards it, and then you end up going like either retrograde or prograde in your orbit, and then you end up ducking either below it or above it, and because all of a sudden your orbit has changed relative to the other. And even at this range, that is something I have to be aware of. So the maneuvers that I'm doing now are very smallish. I'm attempting to do it very small, to just very, very carefully adjust as we get a little bit closer. So I am going to try to kill my relative velocity with the thrusters. This thing does not whip around quite like I'd like it to, but that's, you know, it's a lot more normal for RP-1. All right, so in classic style, all I'm doing now is I'm just bringing down. I've killed my rotation, and I am just using my RCS to bring our relative velocity marker down towards our target in the nav ball, which should, instead of burning directly at our target, that is going to be what gets us closer. So having done that, we are approaching at 0.6 meters per second, which sounds just fine to me. And see, now we are moving in closer. Even so, it's still drifting off just a little bit. And this was something that they'd finally figured out by Gemini 7 when they finally linked up two Gemini spacecraft together. Not linked up like they were touching, but they rendezvoused in space. So that's something that I'm looking forward to trying sometime myself. But here we go. We have just about gotten as close as you can get to another spacecraft. So let's just get in a little bit closer. Let's push myself up just a little bit towards it. Unfortunately, this spacecraft is not like super well balanced for this particular role, so it's actually a little bit difficult for it to do that without, you know, like I'll fire propellant in one direction, then all of them light up to try to keep me balanced and stable. All right, so we are braking. All right, we are coming around, and look at that. You can see the view from Johnny Flores as we have rendezvoused with the booster that brought us into space. We can see now what it takes for actual orbital rendezvous. And it is a lot of very slow, very careful maneuvers that bring you closer and closer over time until you are finally able to make that link in space with all the weird idiosyncrasies of how orbital mechanics works. So this was actually a really good practice session for me as well, because I actually played with this a bunch of different times in simulations, trying to see exactly how this would work. And even then, I ended up having to redo this. Like, it was a different profile that I finally decided on than any of the ones that I'd practiced, because it just doesn't work the way I thought that it would. Like, I thought that, like, well, it'll be exactly the same as it would be in stock KSP. But that is absolutely not so. It is, with the limitation on pointing, because of using RCS and using tiny little RCS quads to save yourself on mass, because of the fuel that you use. Everything else makes this a lot more challenging than stock. And so this was actually a really good lesson for me in being as careful as you possibly can be in doing these rendezvous, and not allowing hubris to get to you to think that, oh, well, no, I have this, of course. I totally understand exactly how to do rendezvous. It's not a problem whatsoever. It's actually a pretty big challenge, and you have to do different things when you are this careful about your fuel economy and how much delta V that you have, so that you can make sure, your astronaut can get back home. So anyways, I think that is pretty darn successful. I don't think we need to absolutely boop this thing. I think we've proven that we could if we really wanted to. So now it's time for us to head back home. All right, so we say farewell to the booster that brought us into space, and we light up our engines to deorbit. And we are going to be bringing this down to about, I think 60 kilometers is probably still fine. So let's do that. And that'll bring us down somewhere on the far side of the planet. So we have plenty of time left on our life support supplies. And we will touch the atmosphere here in a little bit, plenty of sunlight. Hopefully we'll actually come down and all that. But first it is time to separate all the extended stage. Set our, we are now using our, landing guidance thrusters to make sure that we get a good, landing. I've been told to play with the pitch on this to give myself a little bit of lift, so maybe that's something that I could do that would be interesting. So if I were to, like, increase my lift by... Oh yeah, it's actually very reactive and dynamic to how we're... Oops, not current. 0. Oh my goodness. I'm glad that I'm playing with this now while I'm still up in the top part of the atmosphere. So yeah, it looks like if I press minus on the pitch, yeah, pitch does do what I want it to do when we are tagged to 0 degree roll. So this can be how we measure this. So right now we are pointed kind of straight into the airstream. So I am going to see how this works as we get down a little bit further. Whoa. Yeah, I've got really fast physical time warp, but I think that it's probably not as useful as I want it to be, because it causes me to, like, rumble and shake and all that stuff. So anyways, we are coming on down. All right, sun is setting as we are finally beginning to heat up, and I've turned on the aerodynamics overlay to try to get a sense for what the heck is happening. So we'll do surface, we'll get ourselves tagged back to the correct orientation as we are finally down a little bit further down in the atmosphere. We just have a little spike here on, I wonder if that's coincidental. Oh, look at that. Maybe no, I think that's actually being counted as in the airstream for aerodynamics, which is why it's going to melt off here in a second. But if I were to, well, no, it would be, this would in theory give me the pitch, right? 15 degrees. say 10 degrees, see if that gives me any lift or anything. I think if there's any lift spikes on here, it's small enough or hidden by the parts enough that I don't actually see them. All right, so we are running through a blader and we are using up our HTP a little bit, so I need to be careful about that. As we get down further into the atmosphere, we can see the aerodynamic spikes are increasing. Oh, interesting. Okay, so oops, that's the wrong way. Oh gosh. So, interesting thing. This is absolutely working as intended. It's costing me a lot to do it this way, so let me just make it a little more gentle. But even at 5 degrees, my vertical speed is decreasing a lot slower than it would be if I was at 0. So if I'm at 0, you can see that is coming up pretty dramatically, and then I pitch up 5 degrees, and that slows down my vertical speed, the increase of my vertical speed, which is really cool. I think that's exactly what people have been trying to tell me this whole time, and I'm only just now figuring out because I am a big dummy. But this seems like this will be actually a very helpful thing to know, especially as we go forward and have dicier missions. Like, there's nothing super dangerous about what we're doing right now, but this really helps to get us to slow down in this part of the atmosphere. The only thing to watch out for is that maintaining this attitude is very expensive. So I need to be very careful about that. So I'm thinking even now it's time to start reducing that quite a bit so that we don't run completely out of HTP before we get down there. Because even maintaining this trajectory, for whatever reason, is costing me some of this RCS fuel. And I think all that would happen if I were to lose that entirely is we would get a little bit of precessing back and forth in a way that's not super dangerous, especially at this speed. At this point, I think we are pretty darn safe. So just turn off the atmospheric overlay, get the weird screenshot, and that's fine. And we are, completely out of RCS fuel, so we are no longer able to do a darn thing, even if I wanted to. But yeah, that actually made a pretty darn big difference in the way that this craft re-entered. So that's something that I need to take way more into account going forward. This is something that I've known, like, academically, I've known that was a thing and a really important thing to consider, but it's not something that I've ever actually done or dealt with, or felt that I needed to deal with, I suppose. So yeah, really exciting things to try out, and we're learning a lot that will go forward into our Gemini missions. All right, parachute deployed. We are slowing down. All right, so just a couple seconds to splash down, and that was a very successful mission where I learned a lot, at least, and we should, in theory, complete us a contract that gets us a little bit of cash to pay for that mission, which was the final of the Mercury missions. And we have splashdown. Recovery crews are on the way. Contract complete. Crew alive and well after the mission. Congratulations. We have finished that, and the Mercury program is complete. All right, with that mission complete, we are just coming up to the upgrade of the Astronaut complex. So in just a moment here, and 10 more seconds. Badoop. Hooray! All right, so we have a slight improvement to the Astronaut complex. The most important thing is that it now allows our astronauts to do EVAs. So that means that we will be able to do spacewalks out of the Gemini capsule. And that's good because you actually can't EVA out of the Mercury capsule, which, makes sense because that was not something that it was built for in any way. But realistically, we are not going to be able to do EVA until we get the Gemini, and so that is what we will be waiting for. So that is the end of the line for our Mercury program. We have wrapped that up. We will not be using this anymore, and Gemini coming on real soon. Here on the pad, finally, it is time for a brand new launcher. Yes, indeed. So this is what I am calling the Tele 4 Heavy. Yes, I know. But the reason for that is because it's got 4 strap-on boosters, see? So yeah, this is a fairly standard upgrade path, I think. Sort of, kind of. In any case, it's got 4 H1s around the side here, and there are 2 that are that have gimbals and 2 that don't. And I've removed the what do you call them? The vernier engines, and we are still using an LR-105 as a sustainer in the center. So the idea now is that we are going to get up into orbit in the plane of the moon, and we are trying, fingers crossed, to head to Vesta. So I'm going to launch into the plane of the moon in about 20 hours, which is going to put us pretty much bang on the nose of the transfer window. So this is my first actually heavy, like super heavy, well, not super heavy, but this is my first more than 150 ton launcher, weighing in at 252 tons. So finally getting use out of 350 ton pad. Ignition. And lift off. Listen to that roar. Fabulous. So we are heading up into a, oops, not this one, about 150 by 150, please. Into a fairly low orbit around Earth in the plane of the moon, with the idea that we are going to then head off towards Vesta. So this monster here, like I said, is a 252-ton rocket, my first in a class above 150 tons. And I finally found the will to build bigger rockets, and all it took was actually having a mission that needed a bigger rocket, which, you know, that makes sense, right? So we'll talk about the upper stage when we get to it, but what I've basically done is I've taken the Tela design that I had before, where I had an LR-105 and 2 H1s. These are still the first config of the H1. And I had those on the side there as a kind of a mock-up of what the Atlas looked like, with 3 engines kind of in a parallel row. All this does is slap on 2 more non-gimbaling H1s on the other axis, and then yeah, that's it. So there's not a whole lot more to it than there was before, but that gives it a whole bunch more thrust. And I've finally actually also upgraded to a 3-meter tooling for the core stage here, the LR-105. So it's a little bit stubby. But that is because we have up here a Centaur stage that is probably going to fail when we ignite it, which will be very exciting. This is my first kind of like an Atlas Centaur sort of thing, but I could never get the numbers to quite line up in a way that I was happy with. Doing an Atlas Centaur that was fully burning a 2 RL10 config. Which is what I thought was the standard, but I'm finding out now, as people are telling me in the comments, that that's not actually the case. There have been Atlas Centaurs that use just one RL10 up top. The designation Centaur does not necessarily just mean the 2 RL10 config. Is what you should take from that, and something that I'm finding out. Like this was news to me, and it just shows the faulty understanding that I had going into this so far. But anyways, there are many ways to be a Centaur, is what I'm saying. So this warms up a little bit, and there we go, a nice little, well, not so much of a Korolev cross, more of a Korolev cluster explosion, I guess, as those pop on their way back down. But they came off real nice, which was fun. I've tuned down the amount of solid fuel on each of these side boosters so that they like to minimize the weight, and also because, like, in the hopes that they wouldn't flip out quite as much. But obviously that was not super helpful. So anyways, we got another 2.5 minutes to orbit. There's not much new about this part of the design, but I'll talk a little bit about this before we light it up. All right, just a minute left to go until we cut out this second stage booster, and then we have to rely on the upper stage that we have put together, the Centaur that I have in here. That is going to be a pretty dicey thing because, as I've mentioned before, these have not been tested at all, and I never, the timing did not work out to put up even a sounding rocket in between now and the transfer window of Vesta. So I guess we're just gonna, this is gonna be the test. We are testing it live. We have a 20% ignition failure rate on each one of those. You can do the statistics at home as a exercise for the reader, but there is a very good chance that these will fail and this mission will not be successful this time around. Hopefully we'll be able to get another shot at it, because this is a very capable upper stage. This booster is able to chuck it's able to chuck a tiny payload a really long way. All right, we have ignition on our two RL-10s, which have pushed us back on track. All right, so there we go. We are starting to get the first data units in from the liquid hydrogen upper stage, which is why that cooked a little bit on the way up here, because when you have MLI layers, the insulation, when you have the insulation on one of these cryogenic stages, it has a tendency to set itself on fire when you are ascending, which is, it's not great, but that's just kind of is what it is. So yeah, we have we have 9 ignitions remaining on each one of these. We only have 1 burn left, and then the remainder of this burn to go. But this is what I am calling a Centaur upper stage. I couldn't think of anything clever to do with the paint job, so it just kind of is what it is. But it's 2 RL-10 A-3-1, I think. And on top of that is a 330 kilogram probe that we are hurling at Vesta. Hopefully. We'll see what happens when that gets there. We still have another 2 minutes before this stage even burns out. But yeah, so this is going out to the Asteroid Belt, and this is going to be the furthest mission that we've ever launched, and the fastest a probe satellite has ever gone above Earth. At least the fastest a man-made probe has ever gone above Earth. So I think probably something similar is Pioneer 10, which was the first mission to Jupiter, actually, and was thrown on a very similar sort of trajectory by a very similar launcher, I think. Yep, it was launched by an Atlas Centaur, and it had a very similar mission profile where it was just accelerated to ridiculous speeds in low Earth orbit, and then it just was a teeny tiny little probe that was flung off into deep space with the hopes of crossing Jupiter's orbit. And it did. It was really quite successful. It worked out really well, and was the first spacecraft to traverse the asteroid belt, which is why I'm talking about it now, because this is the first mission to the asteroid belt. So we still have 45 seconds to go, but we are headed out to here, and this is, I think, the asteroid belt-ish. Yeah, the asteroid belt is a fuzzy thing in between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. So this does represent the 2 largest bodies that are inside the asteroid belt. The largest things that were almost the size of, almost classified as planets in and of themselves. But they are, the largest denizens up there, and so the only 2 that are really worth visiting. Although there are some asteroid missions that we'll be wanting to do. And we have second stage cutoff. We are just finishing off our orbit of the Centaur upper stage. And here is the thing that is really cool about this, is we got into a 150 kilometer circular orbit in the inclination of the moon with 6,500 meters per second of delta V remaining. So that is what the Telephore Heavy is all about. It is all about putting up tiny probes and then just like punching them as far off into the solar system as we possibly can. So we are now, and we should be like right now at the what do you call it? We should be right now at the transfer window between here and Vesta. So we are just going to grab the pork chop, and you can see that, yes, indeed, we are pretty darn close. Let's reset that. There we go. So that is what that looks like, and it's only going to take us 4,500 meters per second to get there. So we actually have kind of our choice here of what will work, and we want close. So we can say ASAP, and that is in 2 days. We'll I'm not sure if the probe will last that long. We only have about 10 hours. So what's sooner than that? ASAP, please. Okay, there we go. If I just go to if I just reset the view to look at everything, we can see that we have a... Ooh, that's going to take 2 years to get there. Good lord. I'm not sure I took the transit duration quite into mind when I planned this mission, but yeah, well, I guess we'll see how that goes. Wowzers. Yeah, I definitely did not take the transit duration into account as much as I probably should have. I'm not 100% sure these solar panels are going to last the year and a half it's going to take to get to Vesta. Goodness gracious. But, well, anyways, I don't see any reason to be too fussy about that. We've done what we can. These solar panels will work pretty well, hopefully, in being able to transmit back or to get power while it is out in that far away from the sun. So yeah, no reason to be too fussy about it. So let's just go ahead, reset this. I want to get there ASAP. I don't think there's anything fancy we can do with the transit duration that makes it much better than it is, but let's go ahead and grab that, and we can go as much as... Yeah, we'll say that. So that shaves about 40 days off of our transit and costs us 1,500 meters per second more. So that's, you know, about as good as that's going to get, I think. So yeah, that is that. That has us create that node, 6,000 meters per second, and that's happening in 4 hours. So let's go ahead and make that happen. Execute next node. All right, so we are coming up on the burn. We are ullaging up now. We are going to see if this is going to light. And we have an ignition failure. Oh no. Come on, ignite the engine. Do it. Ah, another ignition failure. Activate engine. Oh, another ignition failure. There we go. We got both engines lit. Oh my gosh. Okay. That is ridiculous. Okay, so where are we at? We have 5 ignitions there, 5 ignitions there. Hey, it's symmetrical. That's really nice. I cannot imagine that is an intended behavior, that you're able to do that with transient shutdowns where you're just able to, like, well, just try. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Oh, you know what? I have a bunch of ignitions. I could have just turned off the engine instead of flipping around like that a bunch of times. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so... That's one way. That's one way to get there. But we had some margin, so this is actually going to be fine somehow. Let's nobody tell NASA what we just did, because that was ridiculous. But hopefully this is going to get us out towards the asteroid belt. All right, but we have 3 minutes of burn time here, which that is... Mean time between failure is 31 minutes. 31 minutes, so... I don't know what the statistics tells us about what that means. That's not math that I can do in my head, but I'm sure someone will be along to tell us really quick what the chances are that this is going to fail. I imagine that number is rather high, but we are burning towards Vesta. All right, a little bit less than 30 seconds left to go, and no more eventful 360 no scopes happening on this one. Man, is that a way to just like farm failures to increase your data units really rapidly that I just accidentally did? I don't even know. But yeah, we are just about 2, 1, done. We have made it maybe into a trajectory that is going to bring us all the way to Vesta. Let's go ahead and turn that off, and I will futz with this myself. Oh, I probably should not have done that because now I do not have any kind of... Alright, so we have an encounter, and now I'm going to need to play with this to get this a little bit closer, because this is actually a lot further off than I thought it was when I had finished that burn. But thankfully we have ignitions, and we have plenty of Delta V to make this happen, but this is not something we're going to be able to fix with just RCS, apparently. Couple more seconds. The trick is, or the trouble is, that this has about a thrust to weight ratio of over 5 right now. Oh no, we have an ignition failure. Stop, 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 stop! Stop it! Good lord. Okay. This is a little ridiculous, but trying again, I suppose? Nope, I forgot to hit the activate engine button. How many ignitions do I have left? 4 and 3. Alright, well, if I can just get this darn thing to work, this should still be okay. Okay, both engines activated. Throttle up. There we go, and done. Alright, we will try to finish from there with RCS. Chasing our maneuver node around a little bit here. But yeah, this is a very precise encounter, apparently. Alright, just a little bit on the engine here. Oop, we had another ignition failure, that's good. One last ignition left. Let's see if we can't fine-tune this a little bit better. Actually, let's just do this. Let's stop fussing around with this darn thing and stop being silly. We've gotten most of our work done for us with our Centaur upper stage, which failed me repeatedly, something on the order of 8 times, but I still managed to make work because it had 10 ignitions, so sure, why not? None of those failures was enough to cause an explosion, so I guess we're going to call that fine. So yeah, let's go ahead and separate this, and thank you for your service, Centaur upper stage. We can activate our avionics briefly. And stage to activate our brand new. I said our brand new. You know, someone told me to put an antenna on my probe so that I would not have the problem that I'm having right now where I don't have signal. And I thought that I did, but I don't see it on here, so I guess I didn't. So we are just going to time warp a little bit until we do have signal. Just need to get a little further away from Earth. All right, and now that we are that far away, we have plenty of control. So yeah, the Centaur upper stage that I just used there is exactly what it looked like. It just had some HTP in a balloon tank and 2 RL-10s, and it is an incredibly capable booster, but not one that is apparently reliable yet. So that's something that we'll be working on in the future. But for now, let's take a look at this probe, which is very much upside down. I would like it to be pointing down towards the sun with its gigundous solar panels that it has on here. Oh, that's the wrong direction. We want it to be up, I guess. So with this one, we have upgraded, you may have noticed, to NTO and Aerozine 50, which is one of the shiny new hypergolic bipropellant fuels that we have gained with the landing and early docking node. No, that's the early docking node that has that. So we've got that, and we've got these giant solar panels, which are fantastic, which is going to give us like a huge amount of power out here, like the ability to do basically whatever we want out at this range. But when we get out to the asteroid belt, when we get out to Vesta, we are barely going to have any power. We're going to have practically nothing out at this range. And that's a little bit better than Ceres, which is just a little bit further, but actually comes very close. But it's not going to be great. We're not going to have much power. I would love to use RTGs, but I haven't unlocked any yet. And the next window to get to Vesta is in a year and a half, a little bit less than that, something like that. But yeah, look at this. With these solar panels here in orbit of Earth, we are actually gaining power with the avionics on, which should tell you everything you need to know about that. So when we shut down the avionics, we are just getting a tremendous amount of power back. So yeah, this is, I'm calling this the Intrepid. This is my Intrepid 7, I think we're up to. But I've just started to name it with the body that it's headed to inside of the inside of parentheses on each one of these, because they're all like, it's the same bus and the same design, but it's slightly different. Like this one has very little fuel because none of them need much fuel, especially now that it's using Aerozine, which is just delightfully good. But it has giant solar panels. I've tweaked the transmit power on the dish to actually be what we need to communicate from Vesta, even at its worst opposition. So that's something you have to keep in mind is, focus on the sun. So opposition, we'll talk about that for just a second. So if we have, okay, so here is Vesta. So imagine if you could worry about like all the different points at which you can be communicating, but when you go into the planner, the real antenna GUI, it will give you two numbers. It will give you the transmit rate when you were at your closest, and the transmit rate when you're at your furthest away. And so the closest is when both you and the other body that you are targeting is closest to the sun. So that's probably somewhere over here that they're in opposition, or in. Oh, that's also called an opposition. So it's an opposition when it's the closest, and it's also an opposition when it's the furthest away. Anyways, so that's when the near opposition is when the two bodies are both closest to the sun at a point in their orbit, which, like I said, looks like it's over here-ish. And that is the shortest distance that you're going to get between the two. So that's a relatively short distance, as you can see here. But the furthest opposition is what you really need to plan for when you are planning for your communications. So what if Earth was here and Vesta is here, like as far as possible away as it could be? So that is the worst case scenario number that you're going to get in the real antenna GUI. And that is what you really should be planning for, to make sure that you always have control whenever you're going to be dealing with it. That way you're completely covered. And that is what I have done. And that is why this thing is transmitting at a ridiculous 44 dBm when the default is 30, and if you get really serious diminishing returns on power above 40-ish, it seems. Like it costs 212 watts to transmit science back to Earth, which is, that's a lot, but that's what we need to actually get any signal at all in the orbit of Vesta. So now that we are here, what I think I'm going to do is we are hurtling out of the sphere of influence of Earth really quite quickly. We will hit the edge of the sphere of influence of Earth in just a day and a half, or almost 2 days. So let's just warp on ahead to that, since we are pointing at the sun. Getting a little extra science on our way out, and there we go. Now we have hit the orbit. We are heliocentric, and so what we will do now is we will plan for a mid-course correction, because I have packed plenty of fuel to do so, to make sure that we encounter Vesta, because we really don't want to miss it after all that effort of spinning around in 360 no-scoping with Centaur. So maneuver planner, we are just going to fine-tune our closest approach to the target. I want to come within 20 kilometers if we could. And there we go. In just 65 days, we will do just a teensy little burn, and that will bring us down to meet Vesta on the way back. I kind of wish there was a better way for us to encounter this, but I think the inclination that we had here, look at that. It's not quite in the inclination of everything else. That's interesting. But anyways, this transfer is going to take us up and out far beyond the orbit of Mars and into above the orbit of Vesta, and then we will encounter it on the way back down. I don't anticipate being able to do anything more than scream past at incredible velocity. This is the plan, but of course this is not how we're actually going to make this encounter. We will be able to adjust this just fine. But even if we were, if I were to try to pull this down, maneuver node editor, so we can see, I don't know, what is this, minus 6,000 meters? Nope, still not enough. Minus 8,000. Update. Oop, somewhere in there. Yeah, so we would have to spend 7,700 meters per second to circularize around Vesta. So that is obviously not happening, but that's totally fine. Our flyby contract, which I will now go accept, only wants us to come within a close approach to Vesta, and we are going to screen through, get some science, and all that. Hopefully this is going to be long enough of an encounter. Okay, yeah, this is going to be a 2.5 hour, 2 hour, 45 minute encounter with Vesta. So that's good. I was actually a little bit worried after the way that worked out with Phobos and Deimos, because we're screaming through pretty quickly just to get out there, quickly. Because this is not as capable of a rocket as I am going to make forever. Like, this is the most capable rocket that I've ever built, and it's still not enough to do all sorts of things. So, but yeah, so that is that. I am super excited. We are going to Vesta. We are heading out to the furthest I've ever been in real solar system and visiting a tiny potato in the Asteroid Belt, which is actually the 4th asteroid ever discovered, which is kind of a fun little thing that I learned. So we are turning off smartass. We are going to turn on SAS. No. Oh, that's right, because I didn't have avionics on. So we have avionics on. I am going to leave that on because it will not stay that way when we are unloaded. Like, it will not draw power in that way. Relative rotation to the sun, please and thank you. And so that should keep it nice and steady for its duration, and hopefully the solar panels will last long enough, even though there's 5% wear already, to keep power even when we are distantly orbiting the sun. All right, so that is the first thing that we are doing completely backwards, because now that I have confirmed that mission will actually work, now I'm going to go accept the Vesta flyby contract, which is going to get us, well, a fairly decent amount of money on completion. Boop, there we go. So that gets us a little bit of money now and a bunch of money later. But I think that is all the time we have for this episode. We kind of had a lot going on. It was a very fiddly episode where I was messing around with things and doing a bunch of 360 no-scopes and dealing with a very long and involved manual rendezvous process. But, sometimes you get into the realism part of RP-1 and sometimes you get into the very Kerbal part and do a bunch of 360 no-scopes. But if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Let folks know what you think in the comments down below. I love to hear from you all, and I will see you next time.